Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm Amanda Anguish, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I am joined by my co-host,
Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist.
And we are going to do something we probably shouldn't do, but we're pretty sure about it. We're going to promise you a way to ultimate health and happiness in your mental health. So before we get started, I'm going to ask a question. Dr. Binus, or as we get started, I'm going to ask a question. You do a lot of research, and I know your research has taken you different places. What do you think is one of the most important things to help us have ultimate health?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's so many things when we think about holistic approaches to mental health and health in general that are important. But what's fascinating to me is that when you really boil it down and when you look at the research, more and more we're discovering that the number one thing to improve health, both physically and mentally, is actually connection, meaning relationships, meaning not just the number of relationships that we have, but that sense of belonging, that sense of really having a community and having relationships that are meaningful to us.
Yeah, sometimes we call that intimacy. I know that's a scary word to use. Sometimes not everybody has the same definition of intimacy, but intimacy talks about that deep closeness and connection that we can have with others. And I know that there are some things that sometimes get in the way of that. What are some things that us from building good, healthy, close relationships?
And that is so true. And in today's fast-paced society, it's hard for people to really stop, slow down, and to connect. Oftentimes, we're so busy with our day-to-day lives that we don't really take the time. We might have a lot of friends, so to speak, on Facebook or whatever social media platform. We might even interact with a lot of people. But what we find when it comes to true connection, that it's not the number of interactions that make people feel connected and have that sense of intimacy, like you said, healthy intimacy, but it's actually the quality of the connection. And so it's not the quantity, but it's the quality. And what we find when people are lonely and they're missing that is that it affects health in a huge way. For example, some studies support the idea that loneliness is actually equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day.
Yeah.
And that it's worse for your health than high blood pressure, or obesity.
That's pretty scary. I don't want to give anybody encouragement to do those sorts of things, but to think that our connection... Now, a lot of us think that connection is just, interacting with people. Like, I'm around people all day, every day. Don't tell me I need more connection. But you're talking about a specific kind of connection.
Yeah. So basically, I'm talking about the kind of connection where people feel like they're, you might say in a way, unconditionally valued, like they're valued and
Like
they're
heard.
accepted, they're heard, right? They're seen. And it's not because of just this commodity that you can offer me. In other words, if someone comes to me, even as a psychiatrist, but they're just interested in what I can do for them as far as like medication and that, it's like, okay, I can do something nice for them. That helps maybe a little bit of connection, but that's a whole different thing than if someone comes and some of my patients even say like, well, how are you doing today? And that's nice. I see that they have a genuine interest in me as a person. And then especially when we have conversations where there's a dialogue and we're going to a depth. So that's the type of connection I'm talking about where, there's a degree of healthy vulnerability. There's a degree of being able to be, who I am, be seen for who I really am and be accepted and loved despite even my shortcomings and that sort of thing. That is true connection.
Yeah, how do we do that sometimes though? I know you and I probably deal with a lot of people who they want that, but they don't know how to do that, or they're afraid to connect with people. Maybe they've been hurt in the past.
It's a great question. And I think, that would be a lot depending on the situation, right? Because like you said, there's certain barriers. And I think that's the point, is that we want to identify what are those barriers if we're not feeling connected, if we're feeling isolated,
Yeah.
if we're feeling lonely, we don't belong. We need to identify, well, why is that? What is keeping me? And I would argue some people are just like, well, there's no one out there like me, or there's not enough people that are interested in me or whatever. But there's always some things that can be identified. Sometimes we can't always see those ourselves. And this is where sometimes getting feedback from somebody that we trust, maybe a therapist or someone else, can be helpful. But the general barriers, that I see, again, the fast pace of life, things like media are huge in my mind. We see a huge decrease in the face-to-face connection and that sense of real, more deep intimacy since social media has come on stage. So the pace of life, media, and then, like you said, the past wounds and hurts. That's a huge one, because a lot of people maybe never got the tools, or maybe they had some example of decent relationships, but then they were traumatized by people and they just want to shut down. And so those are the big barriers I generally see.
Yeah, and it's so much easier to consume yourself in something that requires no commitment or connection with it, like television or movies or something like that, Netflix, because I can consume myself with it. It feels like I'm having some kind of interaction, but I don't actually have to invest in that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because what we find when we have a sense of connection, it actually does stimulate the reward circuit, which is good. It's not all bad, right? And oxytocin is released, dopamine is released, and all those things can be really healthy and good at the right levels, right? So come in addiction or even media, these can provide a pseudo relationship, so to speak. And so that same reward pathway that's activated with addiction, that's activated even with media, is also activated when we're connecting in relationships. And so if we're not connecting enough in relationships, then, like you said, it's so easy to gravitate towards media. It's so easy to gravitate towards addictive things to fill that void. But in the end, does that really satisfy us the same way?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt, but it also doesn't heal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean, you say it doesn't hurt. Well, some of these things really can hurt, right?
Yeah,
Like some of the
they do.
addictions and even the media, some of the research, actually, a lot of the research is showing more and more how much it can hurt. And so again, it's trying to fill this void, but it's not actually helping us. It might temporarily feel like, oh yeah, no, I can kind of check out this way and connect, so to speak, on media or with alcohol or sugar or whatever that is, but it doesn't give us the benefit that connection does.
Yeah, it's a compensating strategy just for the moment, but not long term. So you and I have talked about this, and you have some solutions that you have found to help us, satisfy this need for connection, which also then in turn makes us feel happier and healthier. So you want to share some of those with it, or all of them? Because there's only 4, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah, there one book that I've been browsing recently, which I think I've really appreciated a lot of the principles in the book, called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And he's a theologian and also a pastor. And what's interesting, of course, his book as a theologian and a pastor is not particularly research based as
Mhm.
far as, scientific and that sort of thing. But when you look at the points that he makes, we're going to see as we talk together today that he makes some really good points that are supported by science.
Yeah.
And so the big four practices that he encourages, which we're going to touch on, they all start with S, so that might be a good way to remember it. But it's simplicity, slowing, silence and solitude, and then Sabbath. So those are the four big practices.
Okay, so let's talk about the first one
All
then,
right.
simplicity.
So simplicity, and Amanda, this is something that I think you could say a lot about because you've even done talks about like hoarding and that
Uh-huh.
sort of thing. And it's so true that our society is so packed with stuff, and we live in this very consumerist sort of mentality, and the more stuff you have, the more happy you're going to be. But in reality, the research actually shows that when we simplify life and we focus on the things that really matter, which, like we said at the beginning of this time, is relationship, that's where we actually find more happiness. So a big part of the simplicity factor is decluttering and then, also not introducing too much new stuff into our life. In other words, being very selective in what we allow into our world instead of just like, oh, buying because I have the money or this looks shiny or interesting. We need to ask ourselves with every item that we are considering purchasing, what is the true cost to this item? In other words, if I want to buy a bicycle,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, the bike costs $299 at Walmart or whatever, right? And so I look at that, I'm like, okay, well, that's the true cost. No, not really. There's a lot more cost associated with that. Not only is there sales tax,
Yeah.
but there's also what's the cost as far as the amount of time that I need to spend repairing it or keeping that item up, or even what's the cost in the time that I need to spend enjoying it in order for
Yeah.
it to be like worthwhile to purchase,
To my
right?
family or
Yeah,
my job or those
exactly.
sorts of things, or the
Exactly.
time to clean up the garage so I have somewhere to put it.
Yes. So those are all things that we need to take into account. So we need to, really work on being selective on what we allow into our lives because we only have so much time and energy. And so there's that cost that can come in. And we want to, really work on buying better things but a lot fewer things.
Yeah, it sounds like you really have to do a good values assessment and be mindful of these things as you're.
Exactly. And so that brings us to our second S, which is slowing.
I love this one.
Oh, maybe you should talk about this one because I need help in this area.
No, I'm not saying I don't need help in it, but I do love. I think we did a podcast actually on slow living, and
That
so
could
it's
be.
this new concept of, well, maybe not so new. It's a vintage
There we
concept
go. I like
of,
it.
really slowing down your life and being mindful of the things. It has to do with simplicity, doesn't it?
It does.
Because you're being mindful of what you fill into your schedule versus how much you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's essentially taking that idea of simplicity and really putting it in the context of time. And it's saying, okay, let's just slow down. Let's be present. So, for example, don't text and drive, right?
Yeah.
Schedule time for emails instead of like checking them throughout the day and always being like, checking something or your text messages. It's like, okay, put your phone on silent, schedule time to check the text messages, schedule time to check your emails, schedule if you're going to do social media, which we highly recommend you minimize, then, schedule time for that. So you're like slowing down, you're able to work on being present in the moment, right?
It's interesting that we're talking about this because fairly recently, I have heard two individuals specifically, but then even before that, a client of mine, and they told me that they listen to their podcasts and their books like at double time because some people talk too slow. And the second, I should say the third total person of the three people I heard this from, I said, and it just dawned on me, well, how do you do in normal conversations when the person is talking too slow if you get used to listening to anything that's too slow on double time?
Right.
And then I thought, and at what cost are we doing that so I can listen to more podcasts or more books, but can I consume all of those and really get nourished by them as I'm doing it? Maybe they're smarter than me. I don't know. And they can just take in all of that, but that would feel quite overwhelming to me.
That's why in person, so people are like, okay, let's get it out. Let's get it out.
Hurry up, get faster.
So, to all our listeners, if you're listening to this on double time or 1.5 or 1.75 or maybe even 1.25, maybe that's okay, but slow it down a little bit. Let's be present here together right now.
Or maybe they'll just say, "Well, can you go faster then? Speak faster."
That's right. Yeah, and one of these ideas of slowing down, I like this idea, is basically parenting your phone. In other words, putting it to bed early and then making it sleep in, right? So we can really, a lot of this has to do with the way we're using technology, I think.
Yeah, one thing I want to say to this, because I have found that people sometimes have an unhealthy relationship with their schedules in terms of filling out a schedule. And I like to tell them, schedules are not made for packing. Like, you don't want to have every single moment packed with things to do. They're made for organizing.
Yes.
So if you have an hour or 2 hours left in your schedule after you put everything in there, that doesn't mean, oh, I need to put more stuff in it. Maybe it means I just need to rest. Like, I can sit outside and, take in the birds and clean air or something like that. I don't have to fill it just to say I've done and accomplished something.
Absolutely. And we need to get really a lot better at scheduling downtime and feeling good about that. And that really is going to bring us to that fourth piece, which we'll talk about last, which is that Sabbath idea, right? But the third one that I'll touch on is silence and solitude. And so often our world is noisy. It's getting noisier and noisier. And what I mean by that is there's just so much information coming in all the time. And we are becoming not just consumers of stuff, but more and more consumers of information. We're becoming like information junkies. And so basically, the definition that I really like of solitude is the idea that solitude is when our mind is free from the input of other minds. Yeah, and the point here is that when we are free from the input of other minds, whether, and again, other minds, that includes like media, it includes books, it includes people, all this noise coming in. Now we can finally be still to really hear our own thoughts, to get in touch. Like, we think about relationships with others. What about the relationship we have with ourselves? Sometimes we forget about that.
We can't have good relationships with others
right.
if we don't have a good relationship with ourselves.
Meaning we have to take enough time to be quiet to actually understand what's going on in our own minds, in our own hearts, to really be able to address those things in a healthy way, to navigate and of course, like, address maybe the anxieties, the fears, the anger, the joys, all of these things, yes, but also even have time to think through problems, to wrestle with challenges in our life. And as we're doing that, it's like, okay, now I'm starting to actually see a better way of living my life, maybe some tough choices I need to make. And through that process, it's beautiful because as we're getting more silent and we're getting more in touch with ourselves, we're also creating space so that we can start to get in touch with God as well.
I think that's really cool, because so often when I meet people, and I've probably said this before in one of the podcasts, that so often when I meet people that have trouble sleeping, they automatically go to some other kind of noise to break
Drown it. Yeah,
those thoughts that they're having, but those thoughts that they're having are things that they do need to work through, or else they're going to keep coming back louder and louder, and sometimes even manifest in physical things that are
that's
happening
right.
to their bodies. But if we don't get used to being quiet, we never get used to thinking, which then we never get used to processing and solving our problem.
That's exactly it. And I think that's why a lot of people have even difficulty falling asleep, because you've drowned out all those issues that need to be dealt with all day long, and sometimes for weeks, months, and years.
Yeah.
And they've been on the back burner and they keep piling up. And pretty soon your brain is just like, nope, I'm not going to shut down until you start dealing with this. And so then, we try to drown it out with more television or with alcohol or whatever to just shut our mind up. When in reality, what we need to do is actually allow ourselves to understand what's coming up, and really work on that and work through
Yeah.
that.
It's a beautiful thing that your brain is actually trying to solve the problem
Yes.
and you're saying no. I mean, we would consider that an abusive relationship if we had an
Yeah.
issue and the person kept shutting us down and
That's a
saying,
good
"Don't
point.
talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. Like, you're the problem," that sort of thing. And yet that's what our brain's trying to do with us.
That's exactly it. Just shut up. So, so let's touch on the fourth key,
Yeah, this is
and
the cool one.
this is just amazing as I've been studying this out, especially because again, there's science definitely on these other pieces, but I always wondered, like, okay, the Sabbath idea, is there actually science that shows the importance of a Sabbath? And the truth is, there actually is.
Awesome. So you're going to tell us about the research and the science, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I really want to highlight, even as we get into this, is the idea that I think when we really understand what the Sabbath is all about, and when we really understand kind of the how would I say, like the message or the theme of the Sabbath idea, that it can actually permeate the way we live, and it affects these other things. It even sets the stage, I think, for having more simplicity, for
Yeah.
having more, silence and solitude, for slowing down.
Maybe we should slow down for a second and maybe define what Sabbath is. Because I hear a lot of people talking about Sabbath lately or, in different circles and church groups and everything. But what does it actually mean?
Well, it's a great question. So, traditionally from the Bible, what we see there, and this is where the word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, Shabbat, actually, the literal meaning of that is to stop, to stop. Okay. So that's really literally what Sabbath is. It means to stop. But when we look at the context where the Sabbath actually came from, the first Sabbath celebration was done on the seventh day of creation, when God created the world. And so essentially what we see there is God stopped. Okay, he stopped working. Why? Because his point of the Sabbath was to rest. Now, why? Because he was physically tired? No, God is God. He doesn't get tired out. No, the point of why he wanted to rest and be intentional with that is because he had just made this amazing creation that he wanted to connect with, especially Adam and Eve, right? And Jesus even said himself, the Sabbath was made for what? For man, human beings, not the other way around, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, God gave it as a gift because now he made Adam and Eve. And then he said, you know what? I want to give you the gift of time.
It just dawned on me as you're saying this that if Shabbat means stop, what should we maybe do every time we're done with something? Is actually stop and be mindful of what we've just done, what we've learned from it, what we've experienced in it, to enjoy it, enjoy the fulfillment of what we've just done. We don't have to run and do the next thing right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think, even when you look at when God first made the Sabbath, it was like a wedding gift for Adam and Eve. It was like saying, look, I want to set the tone for your marriage.
Yeah.
I want, and for everything else that you do, I want you to actually really prioritize connecting with each other and with me. And that is going to allow the rest of you, the week, everything else you do, to actually have meaning, to have purpose, and to put it in its proper context.
Oh man, this is so cool because you said it was a wedding gift, and I think of other, I don't know off the top of my head where it is, but that when the husbands got married, that they were to take a year off from their duties. And even the 7th year, the crops were supposed to, lay fallow and not have to work and grow and all that stuff, just to let the soil renew its nutrients. And so all of these things throughout the Bible show that after something is done, its cycle is complete then, or beginning something new, or ending singlehood maybe, that you're supposed to take a rest to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so again, you see that it has this connotation of not only stopping, but resetting. And yes. So to get into kind of some of the science, which is really interesting, one of the observations that the Blue Zones author, Dan Buettner, made. So the Blue Zones is basically looking at populations in the world that live to 100 centenarians, much more frequently than other places. And so they identified, several places around the world, like Okinawa, it's a place in Greece, Costa Rica, and then there was also Italy, Sardinia, and then there was Loma Linda. Okay, Loma Linda, California.
Where's that? No,
Southern California. And that's where you and I both did some studying, spent a few years. And so they were looking at, well, what were the factors that led to this longevity? And so they looked at all sorts of things like nutrition, they looked at exercise, they looked at lifestyle, right? And what was fascinating in Southern California and Loma Linda is that they found why are people living so long here? It's not because of the climate. It's not because of the lack of smog, right? But it was actually because there's a lot of Seventh-day Adventists there. And so, again, they started breaking down, well, what was it about the Seventh-day Adventist population that was giving them so much longevity?
Yeah.
And of course, again, they were looking at nutrition, exercise, all these things. But ultimately, what they found was the most important factors. Yes, those did play a role. But again, it boils down to connection. And what Dan Buettner found, especially for Adventists, is that a big part and reason that they can connect, especially in the fast-paced society still of California, right? Because all these other places, you think of like Okinawa, Greece,
on
Italy,
the coast,
exactly.
Mediterranean,
It's like, of course, who wouldn't
chew
want
your food a long time.
slow down, everything's slow, right? Well, Southern California is not known for being slow, right?
No.
But what they found was that the Sabbath was probably the connecting link, which in turn, that slowing down allowed these individuals to have time and live life at a different pace so they could connect in relationships, because that was the most important factor ultimately. And so this is a quote actually from the Blue Zones book, where Dan Buettner says, the Sabbath can be a powerful stress reliever. From sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, Adventists create a sanctuary in time during which they focus on God, their families, and nature. They don't work. Kids don't play organized sports or do homework. Instead, families do things together, such as hiking, that bring them together and make them feel closer to God. For the Adventists, it's a time to put the rest of the week in perspective and to lessen the din and confusion of everyday life.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, I mean, something that we could all use, right? And this is, again, I think one of the keys. And as we look at some of the science behind this, what I've discovered here in recent years is that, well, have you heard of the field called chronobiology before?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to tell us a little bit about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So chronobiology basically has to do with the let me put it this way, with our body rhythm, how our bodies respond to the effect of time. And so most of us have heard of circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
Okay. So with circadian rhythms, basically our body clock, so to speak, responds to the day or the time of day. So at a certain time of day, we tend to get what? Sleepy, right? And other times of day, we tend to wake up and be more alert. most people in the afternoon get a little drowsy, especially after they've eaten. And so our bodies are in a natural rhythm. We call that the circadian rhythm. But one of the major surprises that science has turned up here in recent years is that we also appear to have a weekly body rhythm. And we call that the circaseptan rhythm. And of course, the question comes up, like, where did that even come from, right? Because you think about a year that has to do with, our Earth going around the sun. A day has to do with the Earth spinning on its axis. A month has to do with the lunar cycle. Where would this weekly
Yeah,
sort of
there's no
rhythm
explanation for
come
that.
from, right?
Except,
Yeah, and it's fascinating because there's a book actually that called The Rhythm of Life, where it says these circaseptan, or about weekly rhythms, are one of the major surprises turned up by modern chronobiology. Few scientists would have expected that 7-day biological cycles would prove to be so widespread and so long established in the living world. They are of very ancient origin, appearing in primitive one-celled organisms, and are thought to be present even in bacteria, the simplest form of life now existing.
wow, so cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing that innately it appears from, a lot of science. And of course, there's been, many years since creation. So it might be difficult to see it in everything, but a lot of organisms, whether it's, really primitive ones or more highly evolved ones, so to speak. I don't know if I should more, how should I say that?
Macro evolved.
Yeah. More complex organisms both have that 7-day cycle innately built in.
Cool. Wow, this is really neat to think that, we we get all of the other things through Sabbath too, because it seems to slow us down. It seems to simplify things. And what was the third thing that you had mentioned?
So slowing, simplifying, silence and
Oh yeah,
solitude.
silencing. Yeah,
Yes,
you're cutting a lot of things out. If you're cutting,
exactly.
work and sports and all of that, then you're silencing as well. And so you get to appreciate the Sabbath, and then through the Sabbath you get to appreciate everything else.
That's exactly it. And it's very interesting. Very quickly, there's been a couple times, actually very slowly, I should say. There's been a couple times in history where we've seen social experiments, so to speak, where they've tried to cut out the Sabbath out of society,
Mm-hmm.
and it's gone horribly wrong. For example,
Oh
with
yeah.
the French Revolution, they said this 7-day week doesn't make any sense. So with the French Revolution, they worshiped too. They still had a religion, but they worshiped the goddess of
Oh,
reason.
reason. That's true. That's
Yeah,
right.
the
Yeah.
goddess of reason. And so they said, this is unreasonable. Why don't we do something more reasonable, like the decimal system for the week, right? Because they invented the whole decimal. So anyway, they said, why don't we turn our week into a 10-day week? Well, that didn't work out so well. Actually, over the course of several years, not only were a lot of people's heads chopped off, but also with the
That's a bad
guillotine, right?
bad
Yeah,
thing.
it's not a good thing. Not good for your mental health at all. But on top of that, mental institutions filled up, and again, they pretty quickly returned to the 7-day week because it just was not working out well at
Throwing
all.
off everything.
Yeah, and then 150 years later, Stalin was also like, "What's this 7-day week about?" And he was trying to get rid of religion. And what they did there is that they adopted a 5-day week. And so with that, they basically tried to put like 20% of the labor force every day had a day off. And so, but after I think it was 10 or 15 years of that, they gave up because it just also went terribly wrong and did not
Mm-hmm.
work out. People were upset. They were getting all out of sorts. And so it's fascinating to see how even when socially, this is imposed, because logically, like why is it 7 days? Well, the only thing that we can go back to is actually
Creation
creation,
week. Yeah.
and that it's an innate part
Yeah,
of
it's
our
part of
biology.
us.
That's it.
That's really neat. Thank you for sharing that, and And I think, with talked about, that promise of like good mental health, and that means taking a break.
That's
and
it.
it's something that God's given us. And why would we want to not take that gift and give it back to him if we really valued it?
Yeah. And so, in my mind, uh, the true message of the Sabbath is really saying, okay, how can I live my life in an intentional way where I'm valuing, every moment, I'm taking time to rest. And ultimately, that weekly reminder when we take that full day off per week, which I've done for many years now, and it's made a huge difference for me because what am I doing every week? Well, I'm stopping Shabbat, right? I'm
Yeah.
Shabbating. So I'm stopping and I'm saying, look, I need to take this day to actually be refilled because if I'm going to give to others, I also need to be refilled. Otherwise, I'm not going to have anything to give. And so on that Shabbat day, I'm stopping, my own activities, labors, and trying to, save myself, so to speak. And I'm saying, no, I need to take the time to rest and to reconnect with those things that will refill me, reconnect with God, reconnect with relationships that are healthy, reconnect with activities like going out into nature and healthy food and this sort of thing that really breaks that cycle of chronic stress. And it helps me to also, reconnect even with myself, right? So that I'm getting my priorities back straight. And it's amazing. The other 6 days, our brain works so much better when we do that because now we're not in that cycle of go, go, go.
So this is a good place to Shabbat our
Yes.
podcast. And if you need a little visual for our listeners, just think of that nice little red sign you see at the end of the road at an intersection. And instead of stop, put Shabbat there and put that in your mind. And thank you for listening today too.
Yes, and we want to say Shabbat Shalom, which the Jews say, the Israelis say, and that means the peace. The Shalom part is the peace
That comes with stopping.
That's right.
That's awesome.
And again, this is not even just a weekly thing, but as we understand the message that what this is all about, it can permeate every day. In other words, we can learn to live in the moment. We can learn to slow down, to really appreciate the simplicity of life, to cultivate daily, silence and solitude. And it just makes life so much more meaningful.
The weekly reminder that keeps with you throughout the rest of the week too.
Right.
Thank you for listening. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.